Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty, the absolute foundations for psychology, the nervous and endocrine systems.
Yeah, absolutely. These are your body's core communication networks, the control systems.
And our mission here is to, break these down, make them really clear, especially if you're studying A-level psychology. This stuff is crucial.
Couldn't agree more. We're basically pulling from standard biopsychology concepts, the kind you'd find in textbooks. But the goal isn't just to list facts, it's to get how they work and, like you said, why they're so important for psychology students.
Okay, let's kick off with the nervous system. Think of it as, well, the body's super fast messaging service. It's split into two main parts, right? The CNS and the PNS.
Exactly. You've got the central nervous system, CNS, that's the big boss.
Yeah.
Includes the brain, obviously. Controlling thoughts, behavior, all your bodily functions.
Everything, basically.
Pretty much everything, yeah.
Yeah.
And the spinal cord. The spinal cord is like the main highway connecting the brain to the body. Plus, it handles those super quick reflexes.
Right, those automatic reactions. So CNS, brain, and spinal cord, got it. The peripheral nervous system, the PNS, that must be...
Well, all the rest.
That's it. The PNS is the network of nerves spreading out from the CNS. It goes everywhere, reaching all parts of your body. It's how the CNS gets info in and sends instructions out.
Okay.
And within the PNS, there are two divisions that are really key for psychology. You've got the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system.
Somatic. That rings a bell. That's the voluntary stuff, isn't it? Like deciding to move your arm or kick a ball.
Spot on. The SNS handles voluntary movements. Thinking about waving your hand, that's your somatic system at work. It uses sensory neurons to send information toward the CNS, sometimes called afferent neurons.
Afferent, like arriving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it uses motor neurons to carry instructions away from the CNS to your muscles. Those are efferent, like exiting.
Gotcha. Sensory in, motor out. So SNS for the things we choose to do. What about all the automatic background processes? Heartbeat, breathing. That's where the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, comes in. It manages all those involuntary actions that just happen. Things that keep you going without you thinking about it. Digestion, heart rate, that sort of thing.
And this is where fight or flight fits in. The ANS has different modes.
Precisely. The ANS has two main branches, often working in opposition. There's the sympathetic nervous system.
The accelerator gets you ready for action when things get stressful.
Exactly right. The sympathetic system prepares your body to respond to a threat or challenge. Heart beats faster, you breathe quicker, more oxygen goes to your muscles. All about getting ready to fight or run away.
Fight or flight, yeah.
And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system. Think of that as the brake. It calms things down after the stressor is gone. Brings your body back to a resting state, sometimes called rest and digest.
So it brings it back down.
It does. And what's really fascinating, especially for psychology students, is how these two systems are in this constant dance to maintain what we call homeostasis.
Homeostasis. Keeping everything stable inside, like body temperature.
Exactly, that internal balance. The sympathetic and parasympathetic systems work together, adjusting things moment by moment to keep your internal environment stable.
It's like a constant balancing act. Okay, but what about those really fast reactions? Like you touch a hot stove and your hand flies back before your brain even registers, ouch.
Good question. Those are spinal reflexes. In those cases, the sensory signal shoots straight to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord itself triggers an immediate motor response. Pull your hand away.
So it bypasses the brain initially.
Initially, yes. The signal gets to the brain almost immediately after, so you feel the pain and become aware. But the reflex action itself is super fast, handled by the spinal cord for protection. Shows the spinal cord can do some processing on its own.
Clever design. Okay, that covers the big picture of the nervous system structure. Let's zoom right in now, down to the individual cells, the neurons. What are the key parts we need to know?
Okay, so a neuron is basically a specialized communication cell. You've got the dendrites, these branch-like things that receive signals from other neurons.
The input receivers.
Yeah. Then there's the soma, which is the cell body. It has the nucleus, all the main bits of the cell. Then you have the axon, that's the long cable that carries the electrical signal, the impulse, away from the soma.
The transmitter cable.
Kind of, yeah. And at the very end of the axon, you have the terminal buttons. These are the bits that pass the signal on to the next neuron.
And how does that actually happen? The signal jumping from one neuron to the next? It's not like they're physically wired together, is it? That's the synapse, right?
Exactly. There's a tiny gap between neurons called the synapse, or synaptic gap. When the electrical signal, we call it an action potential, reaches those terminal buttons, it causes the release of chemical messengers. These are the neurotransmitters. They float across that synaptic gap.
Okay.
And they bind to specific receptor sites on the dendrites of the next neuron.
Yeah.
That's often described like a lock and key, or a specific neurotransmitter fits a specific receptor.
Like only the right key opens the lock.
Precisely. And when that binding happens, it can excite or inhibit the next neuron, potentially triggering a new action potential in that neuron, continuing the message. It's an electrochemical process, really.
Wow. So this complex chemical signaling is happening billions of times a second. And there are different types of neurons for different jobs.
Yes, definitely. We've mentioned sensory neurons already. They bring information in from your senses, touch, sight, sound,
Right.
all that.
Right.
Then you have relay neurons. These guys are like the connectors within the CNS, linking sensory and motor neurons, or the intermediaries.
Okay.
And finally, motor neurons carry the instructions out from the CNS to your muscles or glands, telling them to do something, contract, release a hormone, whatever it is.
Sensory relay, motor. Got it. And these neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers, some get the next neuron excited, others tell it to calm down.
Exactly. We talk about excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. Excitatory ones, like, say, noradrenaline, make the next neuron more likely to fire its own action potential.
They give it a go signal.
Sort of, yeah. While inhibitory neurotransmitters like serotonin or GABA make it less likely to fire. They're like a hold-on signal.
Okay. So how does the neuron decide whether to fire or not if it's getting mixed messages?
That's where summation comes in. The receiving neuron essentially adds up all the incoming excitatory signals and inhibitory signals it receives across all its dendrites at any given moment.
Like it's doing a quick calculation.
Pretty much. If the total excitation reaches a certain threshold, overcoming the inhibition, then bang, it fires its own action potential down the axon. If not, it stays quiet. It's the net effect that counts.
That makes sense. It's the overall balance. And some of these neurotransmitters are super important in psychology, right? Affecting mood, behavior.
Hugely important. Take dopamine, for instance. It can be both excitatory and inhibitory, depending on the receptor. It's massively involved in reward, pleasure, motivation, and controlling movement. You'll definitely cover how dopamine imbalances link to things like Parkinson's disease or schizophrenia in your A-level course.
Right. I've heard about those links.
And then there's serotonin, mostly inhibitory. It's crucial for regulating mood, sleep patterns, appetite. Low levels of serotonin are strongly implicated in depression. Understanding these chemicals is just fundamental to understanding the biological side of psychology.
Absolutely. Okay, we've covered the nervous system's fast track. Let's switch gears slightly to the endocrine system. Still a communication network, but it works differently, doesn't it? Slower.
Yes, much slower, generally speaking. The endocrine system is made up of glands scattered throughout your body. These glands produce and secrete chemicals called hormones directly into your bloodstream.
Not across a tiny synapse, but into the blood.
Exactly. So the hormones travel all around the body via the circulatory system, and they act on specific target cells or organs that have receptors for them. Because they travel in the blood, the process is slower than nerve impulses.
Yeah.
But the effects can be much more widespread and last a lot longer.
So nervous system, quick texts, endocrine system, maybe more like sending out a company-wide email, slower delivery, broader reach, longer lasting impact.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually, yeah.
Okay, so what are the key glands we should know about for psych?
Well, top of the list, maybe, is the pituitary gland, often called the master gland,
Why master?
because it releases hormones that actually control the function of many other endocrine glands. It sort of orchestrates things. Plus, it produces things like growth hormone.
Okay, the boss gland. What else?
Then you've got the thyroid gland in your neck, regulates metabolism, energy levels. The adrenal gland sitting on top of your kidneys. They're famous for releasing adrenaline during stress.
Adrenaline, part of that fight or flight response again.
Definitely. Then there's the pancreas, which controls blood sugar levels using insulin and glucagon. And the gonads, the testes in males, ovaries in females, producing sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen, which obviously have huge effects on development and behavior.
Right. So you mentioned adrenaline and fight or flight. How do the nervous system and endocrine system actually team up during, say, a sudden scare?
That's a perfect example of them working together. It really highlights the connection. So you perceive a threat, maybe a sudden loud noise. Your sympathetic nervous system instantly kicks in.
The fast response.
The fast response. One of its signals goes straight to the adrenal medulla. That's the inner part of the adrenal gland, telling it to pump out adrenaline and noradrenaline into the bloodstream.
So nervous system triggers the endocrine system.
Exactly. And those hormones then circulate, causing all those physiological changes, heart racing, breathing fast, muscles getting more blood. It's preparing you for intense physical activity. This rapid sequence is often called the SAM pathway, sympathetic adrenal medulla. Worth remembering that acronym for A-levels.
SAM pathway. Got it. Sympathetic nervous system, adrenal medulla, adrenaline release.
You got it. Then, once the threat passes, the parasympathetic nervous system starts calming things down, and the hormone levels gradually return to normal. It's a beautifully coordinated response.
Okay, that really clarifies how they interact. Let's turn to the brain itself now. The big command center. We know it's got two halves, left and right hemispheres. What's the main idea about them having different jobs, lateralization?
Right, so two hemispheres connected by this massive bundle of nerve fibers, the corpus callosum. It lets them talk to each other. Lateralization just means that for certain tasks, one hemisphere tends to be more dominant, more specialized than the other.
Like language? Isn't that mostly on the left side for most people?
Yes, for the vast majority of right-handers, and even many left-handers, the left hemisphere is dominant for processing the core aspects of language, grammar, vocabulary, producing speech. But that doesn't mean the right hemisphere does nothing. It's often more involved in things like understanding the emotional tone of voice or interpreting metaphors. So it's specialization, not total segregation.
Interesting. So they work together, but have their preferred roles. Okay, let's dive deeper inside the hemispheres. The forebrain is the big, complex part at the front, right? What are the key structures there?
Absolutely. The forebrain is where most of the complex stuff happens. The outer layer, all wrinkled, is the cerebral cortex. That's your hub for consciousness, thought, language, reasoning, planning, all the higher level functions.
The thinking cap.
Pretty much. Then deeper inside, you've got the thalamus. Think of it as a relay station for sensory information. Most sensory signals, sight, sound, touch, pass through the thalamus on their way to the cortex for processing.
Like a sorting office for senses.
Exactly. Then there's the limbic system. This is a collection of structures really important for emotion and memory. Key parts include the hippocampus.
Memory, right. Especially making new memories of events.
Vital for that, yes. Episodic memories. And the amygdala, which is crucial for processing emotions, particularly fear and threat detection, but also other emotions.
The emotion sense.
A major player, yes. And let's not forget the hypothalamus. Tiny structure, but hugely important. It regulates basic drives like hunger, thirst, body temperature, maintaining that homeostasis we talked about. And crucially, it links the nervous system to the endocrine system by controlling the pituitary gland.
Wow, the hypothalamus is a key bridge between the systems. Okay, so forebrain, complex thought, senses, emotion, memory, regulation. What about the hindbrain? Further back and lower down.
The hindbrain deals with more fundamental life support functions. You've got the medulla, or medulla oblongata, right at the base where the spinal cord meets the brain. It controls essential autonomic functions, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, stuff you absolutely need to stay alive, but don't consciously manage.
Vital functions.
Totally vital. Just above it is the pons. It acts like a bridge, too, involved in sleep and arousal, and helps relay information between the cerebellum and the cortex. And then there's the cerebellum itself, tucked underneath the back of the cerebrum.
Cerebellum. Balance and coordination.
It's exactly. Crucial for smooth, coordinated, voluntary movements, posture, balance. But we now know it's also involved in learning motor skills. Think riding a bike, playing piano, and even some cognitive functions, procedural memory. It's more complex than we used to think.
It really sounds like it. It's amazing how specialized these areas are. And you mentioned earlier, a lot of what we know comes from when things go wrong, like studying brain damage, lesion studies.
Yes, historically, that was a primary way we learned. Studying patients who had damage to a specific brain area, perhaps from a stroke or an injury, and observing what functions were impaired, that gave us huge clues. If damage to area X leads to loss of function Y, it strongly suggests area X is involved in function Y.
Makes sense, like connecting the dots after something breaks.
Exactly. Nowadays, we combine that with advanced brain imaging techniques like fMRI, which let us see the brain in action. But lesion studies provided the foundation for much of our brain mapping.
Okay, one more key area. You mentioned it was in the forebrain, the basal ganglia. What's their main role for A-level students to grasp?
Right, the basal ganglia. They're a group of structures deep inside the cerebral hemispheres. They're absolutely critical for controlling movement, not initiating it perhaps, but selecting and smoothing out movements, making them fluid and purposeful. They're also heavily involved in learning habits and skills, particularly motor learning.
So refining movement and learning skills.
Yes, and also motivation and reward. Key parts include the striatum, which links to motivation, the substantia nigra, famous for producing dopamine, and its role in its damage is central to Parkinson's disease, and the putamen, involved in learning motor routines. They work as a complex circuit.
Okay, so movement control, learning, motivation, another really interconnected system. We've covered a lot: nervous system, endocrine system, brain structures. Why is getting all this biological detail so vital for someone studying psychology?
Because ultimately all behavior, all mental processes, thinking, feeling, remembering, have a biological basis. These systems are the machinery. You can't fully understand stress without knowing about the sympathetic nervous system and adrenaline. You can't understand memory without the hippocampus, or mood disorders without neurotransmitters like serotonin.
It's the foundation.
It's the absolute foundation. For A-level psychology, you'll see these concepts pop up constantly in psychopathology, biopsychology, obviously, cognition, stress. Understanding the how biologically helps you understand the why psychologically.
That really drives it home. And thinking about exams, remembering all these pathways and parts can be tough. Any tips based on the textbook ideas?
Definitely. The textbook stressed using things like acronyms. We mentioned SAM for the fight or flight pathway. That's gold. Also, drawing flowcharts or diagrams, visualizing the path of a nerve signal. Dendrite, asoma, axon, terminal, and synapse. Actually drawing it out helps lodge it in your memory.
Make it visual, make it active.
Exactly. Don't just passively read. Create summaries, test yourself, use flashcards for terms. Active recall is key for complex systems like these.
Great advice. Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive then. Key takeaways: nervous system exast, specific communication using neurons and neurotransmitters for rapid responses. Endocrine system, slower, widespread chemical messages using hormones via the bloodstream for longer-lasting regulation.
Both crucial for homeostasis, keeping that internal balance, and both heavily influencing our behavior, thoughts, and feelings.
And the brain, with all its specialized parts, cortex, limbic system, hindbrain, basal ganglia, is the incredibly complex central processor coordinating it all.
Couldn't have said it better. And remember, as you go forward in psychology, these aren't just separate biofacts. They're deeply interwoven with everything you'll study about the mind and behavior. Having this foundation is going to be invaluable.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Just consider how this nonstop, intricate biological dance inside us, neurons firing constantly, hormones ebbing and flowing. How does all that unseen activity actually construct our moment-to-moment experience, our sense of who we are? How does it shape how we react to the world in ways we're probably not even aware of? It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about the biological roots of our own subjective reality. Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.